Hey, this is WhyBeAre with BeamNG.drive, and today we're going to be doing a very unscientific experiment. We're going to be comparing some car crashes, and the comparison we're going to be doing is what happens when you crash two cars that are both going at 40 miles per hour versus when you crash one car that is stationary and another car that's going 80 miles per hour into each other. Now, the actual numbers I just listed are just examples. I don't know exactly what speed we'll be using for sure, but I have a good idea of how we can get a consistent speed. And to do that, all we do is we just line up the cars really far away from each other, and then we lock them into a gear and accelerate, and whatever that gear tops out at is the speed we will use. So with the Grand Marshal that I spawned up, I think this thing first gear tops out at just about 40 miles per hour, so that'll probably be the speed we use for it, but don't quote me on that until we're actually in position and they're both accelerating. Either way, though, we're doing the two cars going at the same speed crash first, so that way the crash with one car stationary, one moving could just match that speed. So by this point, they should have no problem getting up to whatever speeds they need. So we'll put this thing to automatic mode, and then we put it to first gear. Accelerate, go to this car, make sure it's in correct shifting mode, go to first gear, accelerate it as well. And then we'll try to line them up. Looks like they're going to be going about 39 miles per hour each, and that is pretty close to head on right there. I don't think I could have done that much better under those circumstances, so we'll go ahead and use this run as the one we use as a definitive reference to what it looks like between two cars that crash at 39 miles per hour. So now we'll go ahead and spawn up another set of Grand Marshals, and these will be the ones we used in the test where one is stationary and the other one is driving the combined speed of the two vehicles we just crashed. In this case, that speed is 78 miles per hour. And I want to make sure I get a lot of colors in here, so it's going to end up looking like a rainbow, but at least there's variety to the color, right? So we'll park one of them way down here. Now, the distance required to do a crash like this should be a lot more than the distance required to do that first crash, because the time it takes for one car to get up to 40 miles per hour, that's, maybe 5 seconds with this kind of car. It's actually, assuming it's slower than it probably is. But for one car to get up to 80 miles per hour, that's going to be significantly longer. So I'm backing this thing up a ton to make sure it's going fast enough, and okay, that's probably too fast there because we're going to hit the jump and we're going to fly. But it doesn't matter, we can work with this. We go a little bit slow through this part, and then once we hit the level ground, we floor it. Nice and careful, and floor it. And we should also make sure that that car we're about to hit has its parking brake on, because I did not think of that. So parking brake engaged. Engaged. Perfect. Still accelerating. All right, we want 78 miles per hour. So there's 78, so we just got to hold it. How are we looking for angle? That looks pretty head on right there. Don't think we could have done it much better than that. And again, the reason I'm using 78 is just because it's double the speed of that first two, the first two cars we used. So there is the impact. I know it read 79 right as we crashed, but sometimes the speedometer freaks out on impact. And then we'll go ahead and just speed it up, put the brakes on since we don't need anything else going on there. Now we'll take an actual look at the damage. So right here, you can see there's a little bit of damage on the fender that goes all the way to the door, but not too much. Most of the damage is just on the hood and the front bumper in this scenario, but you could just barely see a little bit of issue with the way that fender's holding on. Moving on to these cars over here. If we take a look at the fender, it is just ever so slightly misaligned with the door, just like the one on the other car. And the majority of the damage is once again on the front bumper and the hood. Now, the amount of damage to the hood, you see they are both creased up pretty decently there. We move over to here, and pretty much the same story. They both have a pretty good crease to them. And we can't really see the front bumper, but I'm looking at the engine, and the way the engine is kind of have a little bit of it sticking out the front. So you see this part right here in specific, that stands out. And is it like that on both the cars? Yes. So on both of the cars, that piece is sticking out of the, well, let's just call it the front bumper, even though it's not exactly the front bumper anymore. But it's sticking out just a little bit from that. Probably more sticking out of the grill. Anyways, over here, we can see pretty much the same thing. That piece is just ever so slightly sticking out of the vehicle. So with this in mind, I feel it'd be pretty safe to say that these two collisions are about equal in terms of the amount of damage they did to the car and the likelihood that the driver would survive. Which makes sense from a physics perspective because of momentum. And momentum is a very simple equation. It's just mass times velocity. The mass is the weight of the vehicles, and since you have two identical vehicles crashing into each other on both collisions, the mass is the same. Velocity is the speed, and that's the same but different, because it's 39 plus 39 equals 78, and then you have 78 plus 0 equals 78. So in the end, the momentum in both crashes is the same. Now there is a pretty big oversimplification of things, because really you also need to worry about impulse, momentum change, and rebounding. And to simplify those, when you hit the two cars going the same speed into each other, they stop on point. When you hit a stationary car with a fast car, it slides for a bit. Again, oversimplifying things. But I don't really know if you need to worry about all of that stuff, because the imprecision of crashes themselves, because the speedometer you're using for reference, you got 78.00 to 78.99. I mean, that's over a 1% variance in speed itself right there, and then you're never going to really perfectly duplicate that crash angle. Like, it's going to always be a tiny bit different, and it seems like those differences are going to be major enough where you don't really need to worry about all that, and you can just simplify it down to momentum, and it's good enough. I mean, if you really want to go crazy with it, yeah, break out the big old equations and have fun with it. But you know what? I feel totally comfortable just saying, you know what, we're going to simplify this down. This is a video game after all. Momentum equation, P equals M times V. Done. Simple. Easy. But technically, there is a difference. Now, the next thing I want to do is crashing into a wall at 40 miles per hour and crashing into a car at 40 miles per hour. Now, the walls in this game are the very definition of an unmovable object. You crash into it, and it does not give one bit. If you crash into a house, which is something most people would consider a solid object in real life, it'll give a little bit. Not much, but it'll give a little bit. The walls in this game, it'll give none. So this is a little bit more harsh than a crash into a solid object that you would normally see on the streets, but it should be pretty close. And looking at the amount of damage here, I feel pretty safe saying that this is about the same amount of damage we saw earlier in the combined speed of 80 mile per hour crashes, because you have the same a little bit of misalignment on the fender, you have the bulge on the hood, and then you have that piece of the engine sticking out just a little bit. Now let's take this car and crash into the car ahead of us at the exact same speed. And you will notice that it receives significantly less damage for one simple reason. But first, let's make the impact and take a look at it. So looking at the front right here, you notice the piece of the engine not sticking out. The bulge in the hood, pretty significantly less. And the damage to the fender is much less. It looks like the back half or maybe even 3/4 of the fender is basically undamaged. Reason for that, though, is very simple. The two collisions, they have the exact same amount of momentum. But in the first one, all of it was absorbed by a single vehicle. In the second one, it was absorbed by two vehicles equally. So the amount of damage was less. Simple, right? Now, one more thing I want to do. I want to put a car up against the wall and then crash into it with another car, crushing that car, and see how much damage it does to both of the vehicles. So first, we're going to set this thing up against the wall. And I cannot back it up. Okay, what if we reset it in spot? Does that make it where we can back it up? No. So you know what we'll do? We'll just spawn up a new car. You don't want to back up for me? Then you mean nothing to me. You are replaceable. And that one's already lined up even. So back it up. There we go. We'll let it just touch the wall. I see the whole back of the car kind of jiggling right there. That looks funny. But parking brake on. Put it to park even. There we go. That's perfect setup. I almost never use the parking gear the actual way it's supposed to be used in this game. And now I'll take this car, drive it forward a bunch so we can make sure we can get up to speed. And the speed we'll be using is 78 miles per hour to be exact. I know I keep probably calling it 40 and 80 just because it's easier to say those numbers, but I do mean 39 and 78. See, I had to think for a second to say those numbers. Now, up until this point, I basically knew what was going to happen on every crash. This one I'm not exactly sure. I mean, we have the same momentum as before, but there's a solid object behind the car. How will that affect things? I don't know. We have a little bit more crumple zone technically, but it's also kind of technically a solid object if you go through that car. So I'm curious, really. I'm just curious. So also, does the blue car receive less damage than the cream car because of the solid wall being behind the cream car? We got some questions to figure out here. So looking at this one, I'm seeing the amount of damage to the fender right there is possibly less than we received on the other one, but It could just be an offset crash because on this one it looks like it has a pretty good amount of damage. Amount of hood damage, I would say it's similar. Then you have that piece of the engine sticking out, roughly the same amount as before. So the damage to the blue car, about the same. And cream car, it has its trunk ruined, of course, because it was crushed. I'm going to go ahead and maybe just see if we can back out the blue car right here or not. No, it's not going to move. Well, we'll try to look at it by swapping the camera. And it's as plain as day that the cream car was significantly more damaged than any other car we've seen up until this point because it has damage to the door. And no crash up until now has actually caused any damage to the door. Prior to this, all the doors looked flawless. Anyways, I think that's about all I wanted to do for this video. Again, this is just some unscientific testing just for fun. So until next time, this has been WhyBeAre. I'll see ya.